Life had not always been kind to my brother Thomas and me. After losing our parents at a young age, we clung to each other like survivors of a shipwreck, weathering life's storms together. Our shared tragedy had forged a bond that was unbreakable, a connection that transcended the usual sibling relationship. Thomas was more than a brother to me. He was my mentor, my protector, my confidant. He had taken over our family's company, turning it into a thriving business, and he insisted that I work alongside him. I cherished our days at the office, filled with challenges and triumphs, but it was our time at home that I treasured the most. One evening, as we sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I turned to Thomas and said, "You know, Tom, I can't imagine life without you. We've been through so much together." He smiled warmly, putting his arm around me. "Neither can I, Maggie. You've been my rock. Remember how scared we were when we first took over the company?" I laughed, recalling the memory. We were like two kids playing grown-ups. But we did it. We proved them all wrong. "That's because we had each other," he said, squeezing my shoulder. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Our conversations were often filled with reflections, dreams, and laughter. We were two halves of a whole, understanding each other in a way no one else could. Our home was filled with love, warmth, and the reassuring comfort of family. Little did I know that our perfect world was about to be shattered by a storm named Sarah. As the days turned into weeks, I could sense a change in Thomas. He was more distracted, more distant, lost in thoughts that he did not share with me. One day, as we were having dinner, he looked up, a sparkle in his eyes. "Maggie, I've met someone. Her name's Sarah. I want you to meet her." I was taken aback but tried to hide my surprise. "That's wonderful, Tom. I can't wait to meet her." He grinned, his face glowing with happiness. "She's amazing, Maggie. You'll love her." I smiled, pushing aside my unease. I wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that this new chapter in our lives would be as beautiful as the ones before. But deep down, a small voice whispered a warning. Things were about to change, and I couldn't shake the feeling that our world would never be the same again. Thomas had been talking about Sarah for days, his excitement growing with each passing moment. I wanted to share in his joy, but a nagging doubt lingered at the back of my mind. Who was this woman who had so suddenly captured my brother's heart? The day finally arrived when Thomas decided to bring Sarah home to introduce her to me. I spent the afternoon preparing a special dinner, eager to make a good impression. When the doorbell rang, my heart leaped into my throat. "Margaret, meet Sarah. Isn't she wonderful?" Thomas beamed as he led her into our home. I extended my hand, trying to match his enthusiasm. "Welcome, Sarah. It's a pleasure to meet you." Sarah's handshake was cold, her smile even colder. "Margaret, is it? Thomas has told me so much about you." Her tone was polite, but her eyes held a hint of disdain. We sat down to dinner, the conversation flowing around me, but I felt oddly out of place. "So, Sarah," I ventured, trying to break the ice, "Thomas tells me you work in marketing. That must be fascinating." She flicked a glance at me, her lips curving into a condescending smile. "Oh, it's more than fascinating. It's thrilling, actually. But then, I suppose it's not something everyone would understand." I blinked, taken aback by her response. Thomas seemed oblivious to the undercurrents, his eyes fixed adoringly on Sarah. The evening wore on, filled with Thomas's laughter and Sarah's stories. I tried to engage, to find common ground, but every attempt was met with veiled jibes and subtle digs. "So, Margaret," Sarah said, her eyes gleaming with a challenge, "I hear you work with Thomas. How does it feel to ride on your brother's coattails?" I looked at her, stunned by her audacity. Thomas jumped in, his voice light. "Oh, come on, Sarah. Margaret is a crucial part of the team. She's earned her place." Sarah laughed, a tinkling sound that grated on my nerves. "I'm sure she has." The night ended with smiles and pleasantries, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been judged and found wanting. Sarah's presence had cast a shadow over our once happy home. and I found myself missing the simplicity of our former life. Later, as I was cleaning up, Thomas hugged me from behind. "So, what did you think? Isn't she incredible?" I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. "She's different. I'm happy if you're happy, Tom." He kissed my forehead, oblivious to my reservations. "You'll see, Maggie. You'll grow to love her just as I do." But as I lay in bed that night, listening to the silence of the house, I knew that something precious had been lost. Sarah had entered our lives, and nothing would ever be the same again. As the weeks wore on, Sarah's presence in our lives became more pronounced. She was at our house more often, her laughter ringing through the rooms, her voice dominating conversations. My initial reservations about her were growing into outright distrust, as her treatment of me grew more disdainful. One evening, as I prepared dinner, Sarah walked into the kitchen, her heels clicking on the floor. "Margaret, dear, that smells quite, well, ordinary. I'm used to much more exquisite cuisine. Perhaps I could teach you something." I looked at her, my cheeks burning. "I'm quite capable in the kitchen, thank you." She laughed, tossing her hair. "Oh, I didn't mean to offend. I just thought I could elevate the experience a bit." Thomas, hearing our voices, wandered into the kitchen. "What's going on here?" "Nothing, Tom," I said, biting my lip. "Sarah was just offering to help." He smiled, completely enamored. "Isn't she amazing, Maggie? Always willing to..." Sarah's eyes met mine, a triumphant glint in them. I forced a smile, pushing down my rising anger. The dinner was strained, filled with Sarah's condescending remarks and thinly veiled insults. My brother seemed oblivious to it all, lost in his affection for her. After one particularly humiliating comment, I couldn't contain myself any longer. "Sarah, why do you feel the need to belittle me at every opportunity?" She looked at me, feigning surprise. "Belittle you? Oh, Margaret, you're so sensitive. I'm only trying to help you grow." Thomas looked between us, his brow furrowed. "Maggie, Sarah's just being friendly. You're overreacting." "Am I, Tom?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Am I really?" The rest of the night was a blur of tension and unspoken words. I retreated to my room, tears of frustration stinging my eyes. Thomas tried to talk to me, but I shut him out, unable to make him see the truth. The pattern continued, Sarah's cruelty growing more blatant, my protests falling on deaf ears. I felt like a stranger in my own home, edged out by this woman who seemed determined to diminish me. One day, I finally broke down, confronting Thomas. "Don't you see what she's doing? She's manipulating you, treating me like dirt. Why can't you see it?" Thomas's face was a mask of confusion and hurt. "Maggie, I love her. I thought you'd be happy for me. Why are you trying to ruin this?" I looked at him, my heart breaking. "Because I love you too, Tom, and I can't stand to see you used like this." We stared at each other, the gulf between us widening with every passing moment. The unbreakable bond we once shared was fraying, torn apart by a woman who had come into our lives like a whirlwind, leaving destruction in her wake. Our once happy home was now a battleground, filled with resentment and mistrust. I missed my brother, missed the way we used to be. But I knew that as long as Sarah was in our lives, nothing would ever be the same again. The day had come that I'd been dreading. Thomas, glowing with excitement, had called me into the living room. Sarah was beside him, her eyes glittering with anticipation. My heart sank as I took in the scene, knowing what was coming. "Maggie," Thomas began, his voice trembling with joy. "Sarah has agreed to marry me." He held up her hand, the diamond ring catching the light. I forced a smile, my stomach churning. "That's wonderful, Tom. Congratulations," I managed, my voice sounding hollow even to my ears. Sarah's smile was triumphant as she moved closer. "I'm so glad to finally be a real part of this family, Margaret. We're going to be sisters." The words were like a slap in the face. I looked at her, struggling to keep my composure. "Yes, Sarah. Welcome to the family." The weeks leading up to the wedding were a whirlwind of preparations and celebrations. Sarah took over, her demands growing more outrageous by the day. I tried to help, but every suggestion was met with scorn. During one particularly heated argument over the wedding colors, Sarah snapped, "Honestly, Margaret, your taste is just so pedestrian. I really don't need your input." I looked at her, my patience wearing thin. "This is my brother's wedding too, Sarah. I think I have a right to be involved." She laughed, her voice dripping with condescension. "Oh, Margaret, you really don't understand anything about elegance, do you? Just leave it to the professionals." Thomas, caught in the middle, tried to placate us. "Ladies, please, let's just all get along. It's a happy occasion, remember?" I turned to him, my eyes filled with tears. "Tom, why can't you see what she's doing? She's taking over everything, pushing me out of your life." He looked at me, his face filled with confusion and pain. "Maggie, why can't you just be happy for me? Why are you making this so difficult?" The engagement period was a nightmare, filled with fights and tears. I felt like a stranger in my own home. My relationship with Thomas strained to the breaking point. The joy and love that had once filled our lives were replaced by tension and resentment. The day of the bachelorette party arrived, and I faced it with dread. Sarah had made it clear that I was only invited out of obligation, and I knew that the night would be filled with humiliation and ridicule. As I prepared to leave, I looked at myself in the mirror, the reflection of a woman I no longer recognized staring back at me. The happy, confident person I once was had been replaced by someone filled with doubt and sadness. I glanced at a picture of Thomas and me, taken in happier times, and tears filled my eyes. How had it come to this? How had we lost our way? With a heavy heart, I left for the party, knowing that the night would be a turning point, one way or another. Our lives were about to change, and I couldn't shake the feeling that things would never be the same again. The bachelorette party was held at a luxurious penthouse belonging to one of Sarah's wealthy friends. The room buzzed with laughter and chatter as women sipped champagne and nibbled on hors d'oeuvres. The air was thick with the scent of perfume and the anticipation of the upcoming wedding. I entered the room, feeling like a fish out of water. The women were all glamorous, dressed in designer outfits, their makeup flawless. I, in my modest dress, felt plain and out of place. Sarah greeted me with a faux smile, her eyes glinting. "Margaret, darling, so glad you could make it. I know these sorts of things aren't really your scene, but I'm sure you'll find a way to fit in." I forced a smile, swallowing my anger. "Thank you, Sarah. I'll do my best." The night wore on, filled with games and toasts, all centered around Sarah. I tried to participate, but it was clear that I was an outsider, the object of snickers and whispered comments. At one point, during a particularly raunchy game, Sarah turned to me, her voice dripping with malice. "Come on, Margaret, don't be such a prude. Surely you have some wild stories to share." I looked at her, my cheeks burning. "I prefer to keep my private life private, Sarah." She laughed, her eyes gleaming. "Oh, come on, don't be boring. This is a party, after all." The women around us joined in, their laughter cutting like a knife. I sat there, my face hot, feeling more humiliated than I ever had in my life. The night wore on, the alcohol flowing freely. Sarah became more and more boisterous, her taunts growing more blatant. Finally, unable to take it any longer, I stood up. "I think I'll go get some fresh air." Sarah looked at me, a wicked smile playing on her lips. "Don't be gone too long, Margaret. You wouldn't want to miss all the fun." I left the room, my heart pounding, tears of frustration welling in my eyes. I wandered through the penthouse, trying to clear my head, the laughter and music a distant echo. As I passed a closed door, I heard a sound that stopped me in my tracks. Laughter soft and intimate, followed by a sigh. my heart in my throat, I approached the door, curiosity and dread warring within me. I opened the door a crack and peeked inside. The sight that met my eyes was one I would never forget. Sarah, in the arms of a strange man, her face flushed with passion. My mind reeled, shock and disbelief flooding through me. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking, and began to record. After what felt like an eternity, I retreated, my mind racing. I knew that I had the evidence I needed, the proof that would finally open Thomas's eyes. I returned to the party, my face pale, my body trembling. I knew that everything had changed, that the course of our lives had been irrevocably altered. The night wore on, but I was lost in my thoughts, my mind spinning. The time had come to take action, to fight back against the woman who had torn our family apart. I looked around the room, at the faces of the women who had mocked and belittled me, and I knew that I had the power to bring them all down. With a newfound determination, I faced the future, knowing that I had the strength to reclaim my life and protect my brother from the viper in our midst. The battle had just begun, and I was ready to fight. The wedding day dawned bright and clear, the sun shining down on what should have been the happiest day of my brother's life. As I dressed, my heart heavy in my chest, I couldn't shake the sense of impending doom. I arrived at the venue, a grand estate, adorned with flowers and twinkling lights, the air filled with the scent of roses and the sound of birdsong. Guests milled about, their faces glowing with excitement and joy. I sought out Thomas, finding him in a secluded corner, his face pale, his hands shaking. He looked up as I approached, his eyes filled with a mix of hope and fear. "Maggie," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I'm so glad you're here. I don't know what I'd do without you." I hugged him tightly, tears welling in my eyes. "I'm here for you, Tom. Always." The ceremony began, the music swelling, the guests taking their seats. I watched as Sarah glided down the aisle, her face radiant, her eyes fixed on Thomas. I felt a surge of anger, knowing the truth, knowing what she had done. I gripped my phone tightly, the evidence hidden away, my heart pounding in my chest. The vows were exchanged, the promises made, all the while my mind racing, knowing that the time was drawing near. Finally, the moment came, the time for toasts and speeches. I stood, my legs trembling, my voice steady as I addressed the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to propose a toast to the bride and groom." The room fell silent, all eyes on me. I looked at Sarah, her face smug, her eyes cold. I looked at Thomas, his face filled with love and trust. I took a deep breath, my voice ringing clear. I wish I could stand here today and celebrate this union, but I cannot, for I know the truth. The room gasped, all eyes wide. Sarah's face went white, her eyes wide with fear. I continued, my voice strong. "I have proof that Sarah has been unfaithful to my brother, proof that she is not the woman she pretends to be." I pulled out my phone, my hand steady, and played the video. The room erupted, cries of shock and disbelief filling the air. Thomas's face crumpled, his eyes filled with pain. He looked at Sarah, his voice breaking. "Is it true? How could you?" Sarah's face twisted, her voice filled with venom. "You're a fool, Thomas. I was only with you for your money. You were nothing to me." The room fell silent, the truth laid bare. The wedding was over, the dream shattered. Thomas looked at me, his eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Maggie. Thank you for saving me from this nightmare." I hugged him tightly, my heart aching for him, knowing that we had won, but at such a cost. The guests dispersed, the once joyful occasion now marred by betrayal and heartbreak. As we left the venue, the sun setting, I looked back, knowing that we had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, our bond unbreakable. The battle was over, but the scars would remain. We had faced the truth, and we would move forward, together, our love and trust in each other, our greatest strength. The future was uncertain, but we would face it as a family, knowing that we could overcome anything as long as we had each other.